Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our roundtable panel discussion on continuous testing in a DevOps world. A couple of housekeeping rules. We're going to be fielding questions in real time. We'd like this to be an interactive discussion. So if you have any questions for the panelists, please type them into the question window. I will address them and hopefully within that same segment. Otherwise, we have carved out time at the end for about 15 minutes of Q&A. The session will also be recorded, so we will send the recorded to everybody who has registered. Basically, there are three things that we'd like everyone to walk away with today. Number one is an idea of testing and DevOps versus traditional testing, the elements that enable the DevOps journey, and then the key metrics for measuring DevOps success. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce today's panelists. We have Vice President of Global QA for Infor, Neeraj Tripathi, and Vinay Chandra, Managing Director, Systems Integration at Deloitte Consulting. Neeraj, could you please take a second to introduce yourself and share with the audience why you're so excited about today's discussion?
Sure. Thank you, Francis. Good morning, all, and thank you for having me here. As you all know that software testing has evolved from testing on need to testing as a stage gate in probably early 90s. And then from stage gate to a QA or quality assurance as a discipline right after Y2K. And in recent years, we have seen that testing is no longer an afterthought. And it is very much part of strategy and plan to deliver high quality software. And the only way to go, to be frank, right now is a continuous testing. So I'm very excited to share my experience in this journey. So thank you for having me here again.
Absolutely, and thank you for joining. Vinay, would you please take a moment to share a little bit about your background and why you're excited to be here today as well?
Thank you, Francis. Good morning, Francis, Neeraj. Good to be with you all and everybody else. Thank you for joining in. Good afternoon for some people on the East Coast as well. I have worked on both aspects of development, continuous integration and testing in different parts of my life, and have focused on testing over the past several years. And one thing I'm intrigued is really seeing how the testing landscape has evolved, especially with advent of new methodologies, figuring out how we can continue to infuse effectiveness and efficiency all the way through the process, and look forward to talking with all of you over the next 1 hour.
Awesome. And my name's Francis Adanza. I'm head of marketing here at Zephyr, and one of the things I really like to do is to facilitate these roundtable discussions on topics that are trending in our space. So with that being said, we'd like to kick things off to the audience on a poll. If you could please take a moment to answer this question based on where you're at in your DevOps maturity standpoint. Would you describe your organization as in one of these 4 stages? We'll go ahead and give everybody about 30 seconds to participate. Cool. We'll close that out. Take a look at some of these results. It looks like a majority of the folks are in the just getting started phase. Neeraj, what are your thoughts on the audience's answers?
Actually, I'm not surprised because we have been talking about this for long, and when I say long, for probably months or years, but many organizations are just getting started in terms of figuring out which project, which product makes sense to pilot and roll out this concept. So I think it's in line with what I have seen in industry.
Anything you'd like to share, Vinay?
No, I agree with Neeraj. I think it all depends on the industry. I do in my consulting world see that some of the high-tech industries tend to be more mature and leveraged on Agile or DevOps, whereas some of the more traditional industries are taking steps to go there. But irrespective, hopefully this discussion can cover things across all the spectrums and will be useful for everybody else as well. So looking forward to this.
Okay. Well, let's move along. So Agile and DevOps means different things to different people. For the sake of today's session, could you each please take a moment to explain what Agile DevOps means in each of your worlds? Let's start off with Neeraj.
Okay. Yeah, you're right, Francis. Like it means sometimes the concept get lost in a conversation as well, or the interpretation. But from my experience perspective, Agile is a method of building software where you can respond quickly for your customer demand or for your product demand. So it builds like an ability to do incremental releases rather than doing a big bang approach or big bang releases. While DevOps on the other side is about delivering a business value, and by a close communication and collaboration between the development team and the IT operations. So you're basically breaking those barriers, working together to deliver the business value.
Vinay, do you want to share anything?
Yeah, in my opinion, again, just to add on to Neeraj's point, is Agile really gives you the ability to incrementally build software through smaller increments or sprints. The key aspect here is a fixed capacity, a Scrum team that can prioritize and work through some of the backlog that might be there. The involvement of business and our product stakeholders within the sprint teams is very, very critical. And at the end of each sprint, you need to continue to deliver shippable features or shippable code overall, and focus will be on quality and time to market. DevOps, on the other hand, is an aspect, again, that development, operations, and QA or testing teams come together, involving automation all the way across wherever possible, and really focus on automation all the way in order to infuse speed to develop this. So yeah, I think that's really what we mean, at least by DevOps and Agile, and I think one is essential for the other.
Makes sense. But moving beyond definitions, how can you tell the difference between DevOps and the traditional software development lifecycle? Vinay, why don't you kick things off?
I think the key really here is breaking down the silos. In a traditional software development lifecycle, especially if I look at it from a QA testing lens, it was always an independent testing team working in isolation. After the requirements are all produced, you develop or at least tested requirements, if at all. Then you would have code which were delivered, unit tested, and then you begin your system integration test. Now, with the newer methodologies, that silo has to be broken. It's all one self-contained team that continues to work through different aspects. So the whole everything, including the ecosystem itself, has to be in those contained sprints, and you start to get through the backlog. Especially in DevOps, you focus on process automation, not just test automation at the end of the life cycle, automation all along the way.
Neeraj, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and Vinay explained it very well, the difference between these two. And I agree with Vinay, and its difference sometimes is very obvious. Like in traditional SDLC, as you can say, everything is a task-based. You have a stage gate, one stage to another stage gate. While in the DevOps, you are breaking those silos, and you are not having resources or organization by the function. You're basically putting the organization together to deliver what businesses need. So whether it's a development team, whether it's an operational team, whether it's a testing team, all working together for one common objective of what business value we can deliver. So that's a key difference.
Awesome. Well, we have a question from the audience. Then the question is, are there more frequent installs to production systems? If so, how do you minimize risk of breaking something down in the production system? Neeraj, you want to take the first stab at it?
Yep. So I think the key here is when we say anytime the frequent development or breaking down things, it is things in a smaller chunk you want to break down and deploy that. And how to avoid the risk of breaking things with the frequent development is having a robust regression is a key. And that's where the automation also comes into picture. You have to have a good automation in place, good regression in place to prevent those the failure.
I would like to actually add on to that as well. In some of the newer architectural standards, I think most of these new applications are all self-containerized using microservice-based architecture as well. And that's important because if you look at a traditional architecture where there are point-to-point interfaces or even SOA-like interfaces, you definitely run the risk of breaking things down, especially when you touch your own piece of the code. The key is to have decoupled services, which really has very little impact on the other services that you work with. So combination of using risk-based regression, automation, and that you use newer architectural standards are very, very critical in order to be successful all the way, especially if you're doing very, very continuous and frequent releases to production.
I agree with Vinay. I think Vinay brought up a very good point about how you architect and design your system to minimize that risk in addition to preventing. So Vinay, thank you for adding that point.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, audience, we have another poll question for you. If you could please take a moment and describe your organization, please select one. We'll go ahead and run that poll. And while you're taking that poll, we have another question for the panel. Vinay, can you please answer, can DevOps conceptually apply to external client deliveries?
Yes. When I presume when the question means external client deliveries, I presume you're talking of some product of some sort or SaaS-based approach somewhere. So absolutely. But again, in order to do that, so a DevOps can be implemented in specific phases, or concepts can be taken in initially and used. But if you want to use it combined in a full-fledged way, then definitely the architecture of the application/product has to support it. So it can be used. It just needs to be architected in a way that it is conducive for that. Neeraj, I would like to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it goes back to the DevOps concept. So if you're doing for external clients, I think they have to be part of what business value or what business problem we are solving together. So they have to work in hand in terms of design and developing the application and testing. So it's it becomes a more working together effort in a DevOps manner. So you're extending beyond your organization and including your external client and customer part of that team. So I agree with Vinay, but that's where the communication barrier we need to break.
And I think this is a good question, a follow-up question on the previous that the audience asked. So according to you, who works on the ops team? Is that the actual client?
The experience may be different for different organizations. I can take that first, and Vinay can add his experience. In many instances, currently, especially when the quality becomes a paramount for all of us, we typically have our own operational team who are responsible for the configuration and the deployment and making sure the monitoring of the application is there. So that becomes the operational team, internal operation team, which can work with your software development team in a DevOps. But I have seen in many instances also where they go beyond your internal operation team and start including a few key customers. But mainly, I think majority of the time, I would say their own DevOps team, their own operation team is working with development, what I have seen. But I'll let Vinay also add his experience.
Yeah, I agree. And I would like to add on to say that if anybody that has control on deployments for the environments, right? So that's very critical. That is very critical.
Okay.
Sounds good. Well, we'll continue on and back to the poll question. So if I can get the panelists to take a look at the answers from the audience. Anything that you'd want to share, or does this results in line with what you would anticipate?
I do. Yeah, I think that it is in line with what I expected, but it's interesting overall, because I do think that overall market-wise, it is getting to a hybrid. I think the testing center of excellence is continue to evolve in itself, as with the overall SDLC in general, because the earlier testing center of excellence used to be fully centralized, completely centrally governed, and did add some amount of overhead to the process, especially while you introduce quality. Whereas now, I think the speed and time to market are of utmost importance, and I think it is in line with what we are seeing. So I think that's all I have to say. It's Neeraj, looking forward to how you do it within your own organization, and how does that compare to what you're seeing here?
Yeah. Again, my observation, Vinay and team here, is the centralized TCOE, where it used to be kind of a managed services, kind of diluting, and it's more becoming a governance organization. But the trend is towards having development team and testing team working together. So as you can see on the survey, like I see that a completed integration and development team working together, as well as a hybrid. So those are the two areas what I have seen is the trend is, and the centralized TCOE, as Vinay mentioned and I observed, is kind of changing its task and what it used to be. It's more of a governance now. So I agree. I think I'm not surprised with what poll results are saying.
Yeah, and especially in the Agile and DevOps model, I do see some amount of end-to-end or system integration testing that is still continued by the testing COE or the centralized one, whereas most of the functional testing, the system level tests continue to operate within the Scrum teams on the same silos. So again, just elements of how things work, but definitely in line with what I'm seeing across industries, really.
Perfect. Well, so specifically, what does Neeraj DevOps mean to testing?
I think for testing, DevOps means that the testing team is no longer at the end of SDLC. Means that's the key difference. And so testing team members with the DevOps, they are not only like need to understand their like test cases. They need to probably understand the business outcome. They need to understand what's the end user requirement, because they will be working now closely with operational and development team. So they need to have those skills to understand the business objective and start from the day one they are engaged and involved. And another aspect for testing in a DevOps is the automation skills becomes key, because you want to do frequent and early testing as early as possible. So more you automate, the more integrated you are, the more continuous testing you can do. So that's the kind of, I feel the testing world is changing in DevOps.
Vinay, same question.
I do, in order to just complement what Neeraj said, I think automation was an optional activity in the traditional life cycle, but now it is mandatory. I don't think you can really get through the pace of change that is required without having automation. It's now much more of a time to market thing, not just a cost related issue overall. And the other aspect is it has to be more collaborative. Testing must adapt to be more collaborative with business and development. Earlier, it used to be very, very siloed. That silo has to be crashed right now, while still maintaining and being effective gatekeepers of quality, which is easier said than done. That is very, very important. The third one, I think, which I think people need to understand a little bit more, is it's very difficult to get the traditional tester and put them in this model and expect them to be successful. Yes, some of them can definitely adapt, but it is very important for people to be having a very good knowledge on development and deployment and operations, especially as it relates to automation and so on. Otherwise, the credibility of a tester will be under question, given that they're all sitting together and you continue to test. Sometimes UI may not even be there when you actually test. So it's gone way beyond UI right now. And I would strongly recommend all of your teams to look at how you're structured and make sure that you have people that have development expertise within testing overall. I think that's very, very important.
So along the lines of automation testing, the audience would like to know what type of automation testing is required to maintain quality of continuous production delivery on a frequent basis. Vinay, you want to take the first pass?
Yes, I think I'll answer it in many points. Let's start with the basic one, right? So when you talk about just basic services and automating services, that's probably the first level. Just making and testing web service calls. On the other end, using service virtualization perhaps on the environment. So that is one. Then you have the traditional, more UI-based automation overall. That's at a screen level, which is, again, extremely important. Now the question is the frameworks have to adapt. Now you need to have more scriptless/frictionless frameworks, which now can adapt very quickly and start to automate at a velocity that is much faster. The other aspect that has come in is the concept of end-to-end automation. For example, if you just log into a portal now, can you go and complete your end-to-end business transaction without touching or manual intervention anytime? So that is something that is also important. The framework that you have at the back end really needs to be able to adapt to everything. But across all of these, and then I would end with saying deployment automation as well as test data. These are also essential components of it. Pass it to Neeraj to see if he has thoughts on this as well.
Yep. No, Vinay, again, you covered the automation aspect of the different component or different area. I would also add to what Vinay just said is, in addition to the end-to-end and the feature function and the environment virtualization, we also need to make sure the deployment is automated, because you can automate, but if your deployment is not automated, it's going to take a lot of time. Especially if you have the cloud-based or you have environment as a service, I think the provisioning of environment becomes important. So that should be automated. And the provisioning of environment should kick off your build process. So then the build process, as soon as the build is there, you can run your continuous integration. So it's not the automation at one level. You have to have, and I think Vinay touched upon this before, how you can automate this entire process is key for the DevOps.
Yeah, and sorry, I just thought about another point as well. I think the aspects of test design, I think that's another area which is very regarded at a much lower priority, at least by my importance, and that's something that you can look at automating as well. Can I generate my manual test cases and my test design faster using techniques? That is another important aspect that's key. And last, I'm also seeing aspects of robotic process automation, which is usage of bots within testing. And I would strongly encourage all of you to look at what makes sense within your own ecosystems.
Great, thank you. So moving along, how are we translating the benefits of DevOps as it pertains to testing and QA? Vinay?
I think there are benefits and there are trade-offs as with anything else, right? In the past, the traditional organizations used to really throw testers and use brute force at very much lower rates by usage of offshore very heavily, right? It did improve quality overall, but then there were effects on the time to market and the fact that you could not react quickly when there are undefined requirements or they're not as defined as they should be. How can you really have people that are way away and start testing? So it has definitely, I would say, compromised the ability to offshore as much as it used to be. But having said that, the key benefits that I'm seeing is time to market overall. So if my test cycle used to take weeks before, now I can really get through within hours or days in here. The risk with the right levels of production, I would say right levels of coverage and what you use, the risk of quality has also been balanced. It's important, but that's another great aspect that I think I have seen. So you're really able to release products to production in days and weeks, whereas it used to be months, several quarters probably, and years before. So that's the key aspect.
Yep, and I agree, Vinay. Only thing I would add, again, going back to how does it benefit testing team, in my opinion, it greatly benefit testing team. Like we talked about Agile and we're talking about DevOps. So my view is that Agile helped to improve communication and coordination between development and QA. And now DevOps is taking it further and bringing even operation team into the mix. So what does it do is it helps QA team to get complete picture. And they get involved early on for planning, designing, automating. So this is where the really the importance in terms of what testing team gets benefit with having involvement early and understanding the big picture. Remember, like speed is important, but quality is critical, right? So while we are trying to deliver faster, the testing team is greatly benefited as part of this delivery, making sure it's quality delivery, and that's where it's important that you do automation, you get involved early, and then deliver the quality product frequently.
Great. We'll go ahead and run another poll question, and while we're doing that, I have a couple more questions from the audience for the two of you. So audience, with that said, can you please answer this question? What are your challenges in adopting DevOps? Please select the biggest challenge you're facing. And Neeraj, I'd like to understand, this is a good question from the audience, especially coming from our perspective of helping with manual testing. Is DevOps completely dependent on automation?
I won't say completely dependent on automation. Automation enables the faster adoption of the DevOps. There will still be a place for, I won't say manual testing, I would call it as a manual domain subject matter expertise, because we still need to have testing resources who understand end-to-end functionality, who understand what business value is getting delivered, so they can have either a visual or some kind of mechanism to derive those scenarios or document those scenarios, and then the automation skill is required to make sure we can automate those as soon as possible. So there is a place for manual testing, more of a SME level rather than any other different language. Vinay, you want to add or your
Yeah, I think that was a great answer, Neeraj. I agree with you. I think automation is extremely important to DevOps. It's one of the key components, but it is not the only solution. You need to complement it with general functional and business expertise. Otherwise, your test coverage itself will be faulty. I don't think it removes that completely. I think it's just an enabler to accelerate the velocity overall.
All right, well, let's take a look at the audience's answers to the data. Neeraj, based on your experience, what are your thoughts on their top challenges?
I think this is both, I think, what on the top in the poll, resources in terms of expertise and automation. So, and this is, I think, changing the kind of a skill set we require for a testing or adoption to DevOps. As we discussed, the automation is key. So I'm not surprised with that result. And in terms of expertise, I think it's more of a, and it's my experience, more of sometimes it's a cultural change within the organization, and then expertise can be built. But this is in line with what I see in the industry. But I'll let Vinay add. He has probably more exposure to different.
No, I was just smiling here because I realized that we are preaching to the choir here by a long way. But yeah, absolutely. I think everybody hits the nail on the head. I think it does require a careful thought on your skill set and resources, because earlier we could do with very basic UI testers and people that had a specific UI testing background. Now that has to completely change going forward. So yeah, I think the focus is on the right aspects, and those are going to continue to be challenges. On the automation front, there are definitely things that make life easier, but I agree with what I hear.
Thank you. So I think this next question is in line with the first poll question we asked the audience of where they're at stage. So it seems like most of the folks are just getting started. What are the key enablers if testing wants to adopt to DevOps? Vinay?
Yeah, I think the key aspects is looking at the overall tool ecosystem. Some of the aspects of how your code, source control tools, your infrastructure, your application architecture, what is it today, and what aspects of DevOps can you implement in there? Maybe I start small, implement more like DevOps on lower environments to begin with, at least to a place where it's not fully customer impacting, but see how that works out before you take it all the way forward. The other aspect is evaluation of the current team and whether they have the right technical skill sets in order to be successful in this model.
Yep, agree, Vinay. And again, the key enabler and the things I think is important is start small. So when you're trying out something new, the find out the project or application or product, whatever you're doing, and see if you can combine this team for that particular application, work in a DevOps manner. And as I mentioned, it's more of a cultural change as well. So it does take time, but it's important to start small and then roll it out. Means other key enabler is obviously to really work in a DevOps manner, you have to have a good source control tool, because you will be doing a frequent deployment, and you want to make sure that you have a better control there. The infrastructure process should be, as we mentioned before, should be automated in terms of provisioning the environment, in terms of running the continuous testing. And another key enabler we touched upon multiple times is how much automation we can do from a testing perspective as well, in addition to the process part. So those all together can really enable you to start small and then go broader in your organization.
Thank you. So before you start the journey, like what are some of the risks and considerations? Niraj?
Yeah, I think one of the important things when we, and again, as I mentioned, cultural, right? So if we say we combine the team, we put together development, testing, operational team, I think one thing to keep in mind is that putting all this together, the accountability doesn't go away. We still need to have different part and function of the organization be responsible of what they're doing and what they're accountable. So my advice to the team is always that make sure that you have a clear RACI, that who is doing what, because when you're working in a manner where you need to deliver fast, you really can't afford any slippage. You really can't afford the waiting on somebody. So having early on defined that RACI will really help to adopt DevOps in your organization. Vinay, you want to add?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think it's a factor of your industry that we are in. Probably all you guys might be in some of the newer industries, in which case with online, very high online customer interaction and so on, then it's almost a requirement right now to be on DevOps overall. So it's a lot easier to. Whereas in some of the more traditional industries, such as healthcare, where things are much more daisy-chained, the business processes are much more daisy-chained, it's much more difficult. I would not even recommend for you to be completely agile or fully DevOps, but you can pick some pieces. For example, your interfaces at the central, if you have a central interface system, that's something you can implement aspects of DevOps there, and because you don't have too much of a UI requirement out there, so you can go ahead and add on DevOps, figure out continuous deployments and automation to the interface in particular. But I would not recommend this. If you have daisy chain systems all the way, I would not expect that you are fully agile or DevOps. Then it's going to be almost a nightmare to deal with it if you try doing that straight away. I think it's much more of a phased approach there.
So we asked the audience what stages they were in early, and it seemed like most of them are just getting started. What were some tips and tricks that you would recommend for folks that are just getting started? Niraj?
I think to get it started, as always for any other thing, DevOps is not different, is to understand how you're going to measure the success, right? What you're trying to do, what you're trying to deliver. So that's very important for organization to agree upon and have clear vision that what you're trying to achieve and what the success look like. And then once you have that, obviously assembling the right team, like one of the questions we had before is what the operation team look like. So if you have an internal operation team, you have to identify resources from those operational team, be part of this DevOps team. In case you don't have your internal operation team, then obviously you need to have your few customer identify as part of this DevOps team. And once the team is identified, then you start working, piloting the concept of DevOps, that how it's going to work together, who is doing what. And then that goes without saying, we talked so much about automation, right? So you start doing the process automation, you start doing the test automation, and the last but not least, right? You have to have the continuous improvement. It's not a one-time effort that you worked on model, you figured out a model, you put in organization, it's going to work perfectly. Once you roll it out, there may be some failure, there may be some learning, and then that's where you need to apply what is really good for your organization, where you need to tweak and change to make it work. So that's what I would recommend. Vinay, you want to add or update what I just said?
Yeah, I probably might want to give a very relevant example at one of our clients right now, where we are actually completely rebuilding a system that's currently in COBOL into Java. It's a full rewrite. It's probably a year old. It's a full year project. And what we have done there is literally, even though the aspects of SDLC are fairly waterfall, we've implemented DevOps mostly from a lower environment standpoint. So we, right from the start, from the first increment that we continue to build the software in, we continue to check in. We have continuous integration, continuous deployments into environments. We have automated tests built right up, grounds up. And that has definitely helped. Now that once we actually deploy this to production, then it continues to be DevOps going forward. So the key is identifying a silo or a piece of application or applications that are fairly decoupled to start this process, so that you can slowly expand it all the way through rather than touching the whole wide ecosystem at one point. I think that's an important aspect that I'd like to raise.
Makes sense. So Vinay, from your perspective, how has the role of the tester changed?
Yeah, I think we've been addressing from beginning. I think it is the biggest aspect in our traditional tester role is they were taught to go by requirements overall. So you would have screens, you would have requirements, you would go through pathways, identify all the paths that you would traverse through and write test cases for it. Now, with such a changing landscape, the testers almost need to be both functional and technical in nature straight away, and that's asking a lot, right? I would definitely say one or the other extensively. The people will definitely be able to understand code, figure out what that code is trying to do, even though you might not have the application itself, and be able to ask intelligent questions while we write our tests, either automated or manual. The second aspect is functionally know what business process this is aiming to test. Now, both aspects need to be brought in within the testing team. Overall, any type of UI testers, it might still continue to exist, but the percentage of that team that you will have proper UI testers is very, very limited right now. Earlier, it used to be a very large percentage. Now you will have extremely small. So I would strongly advise all of you, if you have a lot of team with a big UI tester count, then I would say, please look at it and see how you can upskill that.
And so, Neeraj, another question on top of that. As a VP, how do you see the role of your QA managers or your QA directors changing in a DevOps framework?
I think that's a good question. The role of manager and director is changing more from the involvement perspective, right? So earlier, if you are part of just a stage gate, those manager and director used to be probably responsible to produce the metric and call out for the quality. Now they are equally accountable part of the DevOps team, where they belong to which business function. They are equally responsible and accountable as their development partner. So it has changed from the accountability perspective. And that also addresses question, and I'm going to add upon what just Vinay said, and the role of tester, right? So, and that goes back to the manager and director role as well. Now the testing team, including the management, is more responsible and accountable to build the quality within your application and software, rather than testing the quality after the build is done. So it changes the way organization used to work. Now they are early on, they are equally responsible to build the quality in, whether it's the design of the application, whether it's the early testing, as Vinay said, without UI. So they are part of building the quality application rather than testing it. So that's where it's changing the role of a tester as well as the leadership role like manager and directors.
Great, thank you. So what are the skills required to effectively make the DevOps run smoothly? Neeraj, you want to continue?
I think DevOps requires team members to really work together in cohesive environment. Hence, the skills required is more of a teamwork, a good communication, and so those becomes critical when you're working as a part of one team. I think this also requires, in terms of when you're working in a DevOps, more knowledge towards infrastructure, the virtualization, the configuration, because earlier the testing team can say that I really don't care all these things. I'm going to test the application, and if it does not work, I'm going to log a defect and let development team fix it. I think that no longer is valid in DevOps environment. You are part of the team, as I said, of building the quality in. So knowledge of infrastructure, the virtualization, the configuration is important. If you are building an application for a cloud, then the knowledge of the cloud application, how it's been tested, what needs to be tested is another aspect you need to be aware of. And again, we touched upon multiple times, the automation skills, that's key. And then knowledge of industry, right? So you are part of a team which is delivering a business value. You cannot afford not to know what business value you're delivering, because you are part of that team which is identifying the business value. So the domain knowledge becomes critical as well. So those are the aspects I would say, the skills which needs to be enhanced or adopted when you work in a DevOps environment. Vinay, I will let you add on this as well.
Oh no, Neeraj, I think you covered almost everything. I think overall, especially important that, especially from a management and leadership standpoint, it's important that people learn to appreciate technology. Even if you're a test manager or a test director, really understand technology and tiers of architecture and how it is architected and so on before you take up this, but you covered everything.
So Neeraj, you mentioned infrastructure. The audience would like to hear your thoughts on test frameworks for testing the scripts that automate infrastructure, essentially infrastructure as a code.
Yeah, so infrastructure as like, take an example, we are provisioning the environment. So if provisioning is environment is part of your process, and it should be, then you need to know what is getting provisioned. That knowledge is important. If you are virtualizing your services, you need to understand what services are getting virtualized so that you can write your APIs, you can write your test cases according to that. So that knowledge of infrastructure is important, and the configuration, right? So what configuration you are testing, because what I have experienced is the things are failing, and because of the configuration, and you cannot just stand back and say somebody else will figure it out, the configuration issue. It's very important in working in a DevOps as a one team, what configuration really changed and what configuration caused a defect, so that when you are writing your smoke test next time, you are accounting that kind of defect to ensure that those configuration can test it before you really call it out or start your functional testing. So that's where the importance of knowing infrastructure, knowing configuration comes into picture.
Anything you'd like to add there?
I think, again, when you have infrastructure, I think it's important aspect to think through is whether you're using cloud or is it completely at a data center, or is it a hybrid of the two, and design your tests accordingly to test that. If it is a cloud in a public cloud like an AWS infrastructure at the back end, then obviously you need to have certain tests to really run against it, versus if you have a fully hosted data center, then that is a completely different ecosystem as well. So it's important to understand how we are architected, how the applications are architected, and write a set of tests both to test components as well as them working together along with the application.
Great, thank you. Well, we talked a lot about some of the benefits, tips and tricks getting started. Vinay, how do you actually measure success?
I think there are personally, yeah, right, and what we have used in here is really two things. One is how frequent am I able to get my releases to market, maintaining the level of quality. That's generally the term on DevOps in itself. Now, from a testing standpoint, how am I able to run my overall test cycle, and have I been able to reduce my test cycle leveraging types of automations? I will also go farther ahead to see whether you've been able to reduce your cost of a test case, or at least time taken end-to-end, mean time taken for a test case and mean time taken to detect a defect. And have you seen reductions, or at least is it trending the right way when you start to use DevOps? It should, but I would use these metrics to at least start to think through measuring success. And at the end of the day, customer satisfaction. So if it is your product teams or business teams that you have, or your client teams, whether they are truly satisfied with the pace of change, or is it trending the right way? I would use all of these to measure success. And maybe, Neeraj, what you do with your clients at Infor, that will be interesting to the audience as well.
Yep, no, it aligns with what you just said, Vinay. I think the key is, Vinay just mentioned, is mean time to repair your issue should get significantly with DevOps, because you work together in a DevOps model, and then you find an issue, you really know where the issue is, because operational team is part of your DevOps environment, and that's where it helps you significantly reduce those time to fix the defect. And that also directly translates to the customer satisfaction. So customer satisfaction can be rated in a multiple way. One, I think, is like how soon you can resolve the issue. Second is how good quality product you're producing every time you deliver your product or your patches, right? And being operational team, part of now like a DevOps, you should be able to see the trend that those issues should be going down. So that's where the customer satisfaction comes into picture. Your number of complaints should reduce, and those are the key measures for any DevOps, whether it's working or not. Means speed is one thing, but I think the key is quality of what you're delivering and the ability to revert back in case you need to, right? So those all is a part of success you can measure as part of DevOps.
Great. Neeraj, do you mind continuing and share a little bit about what a DevOps dashboard would look like for various stakeholders on the project team?
Yeah, I think it depends on what you want to track as part of a dashboard, right? But the few things you can probably consider, like that what's the load time and what's the memory usage, because all this part you have put a team together. And in a DevOps manner, you have operational team, you have development, you have testing. So you should be able to put a dashboard together where how frequently you are deploying, what kind of changes you are deploying, what kind of quality trends are there with each deployment, and how stable your code is, right? So when you deploy the code, how frequently you are able to deploy without finding any defects. So these are the different attributes you can capture, and more importantly, the trend, because if you just started your DevOps journey, the things will not change overnight. So you have to see the trend with having a DevOps in place. How does it compare from your delivery without DevOps versus DevOps in terms of cost, in terms of time, in terms of quality? This trending will be part of or should be part of your dashboard. Vinay, you want to add anything?
No, you covered it all.
Great. Well, we have time left for a few more audience questions, which I'll present to the panel in just a second. But just to recap, this brings us to the end of today's session. And I hope we delivered on our promise of covering these 3 areas. If we didn't, we'd like to hear from you. Your feedback is very important to us. It helps improve our future panel discussions. So one final poll question to the audience, if you could please rate this webinar while we go ahead and ask a few last questions to the panel. Thank you. So one question for the panel is, what would the challenges be for manual testers? Vinay, you want to take the first half?
Yes, I would say the biggest challenge will be the lack of requirements that are defined in the right way that used to be defined in. Right now, you might not have screens, you might not have any tangible application in itself overall. So the knowledge of understanding and knowledge of code is something that they will have to quickly learn in order to be effective in this model overall. The other aspect is if they're manual testers today and they want to be going forward, I would say then the business aspects have to come in, where they need to understand application flows much more end to end and understand how the business works. So you're truly orienting more like a BA in the traditional world. So that is another option to them. So I would say most of where I have seen testers struggle is really if they have cross-industry manual testers where they were used to operating in a UI, I have seen that they continue to struggle.
Yep, and I would just add what Vinay just said. I think he explained it very well. Other place where manual testers can continue to add value is the designing of the test cases. So even you automating, if you apply right techniques, you can minimize your number of automated scripts for testing. So your domain knowledge, your testing knowledge, how to break the system, what to test in the system is very relevant even in a DevOps environment to add value to make sure we are automating the right kind of a script.
Here's a pretty good one. How do you avoid testers getting complacent, relying on automation, relying on developers, etc.?
I would say that's one of the challenges, right? Going forward, you are not relying on developers. I think that's not what you want. What you want is the ability to understand code so that you can actually go in and be more productive on what the application is supposed to do, rather than just relying on developers. Now, if you are able to understand design and how the design documents are structured and be able to really critique and derive the tests out of it, I think it's still important for anybody to be focused on testing and validating the application as against just doing what the developers ask you to do. That's not the intent at all, but the credibility is vastly enhanced when you have development knowledge so that you can speak on the same terms and be able to understand the language overall. But I would say yes, that's an important aspect to be kept in mind, that you just don't rely on what they're throwing you, because if you test something that is incorrect, you don't really know what the expected result is. The test is likely to be passed, but the actual output or the outcome is not likely to be valid either. So yeah, I would say don't fall into that trap, but be more intelligent along the way.
All right, well, that brings us to the top of the hour. We do want to be respectful for everyone's time. We understand that there were a great deal of questions that we were not able to present to the panelists. We will do our best to follow up with the panelists as well as our internal teams to get these questions answered and follow up with you individually. Thank you, audience, for joining today. Thank you, Neeraj, Vinay. It was a pleasure. I've learned a lot, and look forward to doing more of these with you guys in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks.